Have you ever wondered how the police came to be part of our society? Welcome to The Intrigued Mind, and join us in our two-part series on the history of the police and police reform. If you haven't watched part 1, check out the link in the description box below. In today's episode, let's delve deeper into how the civil rights movement, the war on drugs and the police militarization all integrate into how the police play their role in our society today. In part 1, we stopped at the pivotal moment of the Montgomery Bus Boycott and how it sparked the discussion on civil rights and police brutality at the time. And if this old bus seems familiar to you, you may remember what took place inside. In Montgomery, Alabama, on December 1st, 1955, African-American seamstress Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white male, which led to her arrest. However, what led her to stand up for her rights? At the time there was injustice, inequality and also police brutality seen across America. The Montgomery Bus Boycott would be one of the many turning points in the civil rights movement as it made headlines around the world. Before Rosa Parks stood her ground, Viola White made her stance against bus segregation in 1944, in the exact same city and state, inspiring Rosa Parks to do the same. However, not only did the police beat and arrest Viola, but they also raped her 16-year-old daughter as retaliation for making the stance. This is just a snapshot of one of the many instances that police abuse their powers to suppress dissent and intimidate those who did speak out against the lack of justice for black victims of police violence and white supremacists. In 1957, Arkansas asked 9 volunteers from an all-black high school to attend classes with a formerly all-white Central High School. 9 of them, known as the Little Rock Nine, went to begin class but were met with a threatening mob and the Arkansas National Guard. Eisenhower intervened and ordered federal troops to escort them to and from classes. This further made it clearer on how there was a need for a new civil rights legislation. On September 9, 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 was signed by Eisenhower and was put into law. Additional legislation such as equality for job opportunities were put into a revised version signed by Johnson in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. However, even if there was a Civil Rights Act in place, police brutality was still rampant across the USA. In March 1965, the civil rights movement in Selma, Alabama took a violent turn as 600 peaceful marchers who protested the killing of black civil rights activist Jimmy Lee Jackson were tear-gassed and beaten by the police. They were merely nearing the Edmund-Pettus Bridge but were blocked by the Alabama State Police sent by Governor George Wallace, a vocal supporter of segregation. This event became known as Bloody Sunday, as 17 marchers were hospitalized and 50 treated for lesser injuries due to the police interference. Another instance was in the same year wherein a Marquette was pulled over for reckless driving in Los Angeles, which then escalated to a minor fight with the police and escalated into a community dispute. Police eventually hurt a pregnant woman, which intensified the riot and even drew help from the National Guard to control the riot. Around 34 were killed, 1,032 were injured and more than 3,000 were arrested. This event started what is known as the Watts Riots, which would be just one of the 750 riots that took place across the United States from the years 1964 to 1970. The riots intensified in 1968 after the murder of Martin Luther King, where over 100 cities participated in what still remains to be one of the largest waves of social unrest in the USA. However, it was not until after the assassination of John F. Kennedy where another act was being legislated. It was an effort of Lyndon B. Johnson to put an end to the crime and riots that surfaced. The Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 created available grants to local government units to purchase or develop military-grade weapons or resources that could suppress riots in their areas. This Safe Streets Act, together with the Nixons War on drugs, are what sped up the militarization of the police and the repercussions that came with it. For Nixon, the use of drugs in the early 1970s was widespread, but he did not see it as a duty of society to correct. He saw it as a crime that deserved punishment. He convinced the public into agreeing with his plans in 2 ways: by vindicating the white middle class for drug-related violences and by transforming the image of a drug user into a threat to American society. His view resonated with the silent majority and led to an increase in police power in the arrest of drugs addicts, which was seen as a conservative way to control crime. Gone were the ideas of medical rehabilitation for addicts. It became a matter of hacking up the most drug addicts per city. Between the years 1982 to 2007, the number of arrests for drug possession tripled, and up to this date, it remains the largest categories of arrests in the US, with racial, ethnic disparities evident. Aside from the large number of arrests, special weapons and tactic teams, or commonly known as SWAT teams, also increased. From having a handful of SWAT teams in American police departments during the 60s and 70s, by 1997, cities with less than 50,000 residents had at least one SWAT team in their police department armed with military-grade weapons. Surprisingly, these teams were formed not for hostage situations or terrorist attacks, but for low-level non-violent offences like drug possession. The Bush administration also witnessed the most allocation of most funds to the drug war compared to previous presidents. It was evident of an escalation of militarization in drug law enforcement. But what allowed local enforcers to gain access to the military weaponry in the first place? In the early 1990s, the Department of Defense of the United States established the 1033 program. This allowed local law enforcement agencies to gain access to military-grade equipment, such as machine guns, night vision goggles, armoured vehicles, grenade launchers, and even the military aircraft. Since the 1980s, the use of these equipment among police rose around 1,400%. However, despite the use of the military-grade equipment, it has led to a decline in the public's trust of the police. Use of the equipment was seen as going too far and pushing the police's confidence too much to the point of the compromising public safety. Imagine going out in the middle of the day and riding along your neighbourhood street. You see a police truck with a machine gun cruise by. Well, that's what the residents of cities such as Ferguson, Charlotte and Southampton saw. The history of the police started out as an effort of a few good people to protect a community, but it has escalated into a more complex role in society. From being armed with only a baton, they now become armed with machine guns. From a community type of policing, many governments have reverted back to a problem-orientated policing, identifying only the root causes of crime without any regard for the community they serve. This is not to be thought of as a problem only evident in the USA. Police brutality, whether on the topic of racism or drug wars, is worldwide and rampant. An example would be in the Philippines, wherein President Rodrigo Duterte is famed for using police militarization for the drug war that has appalled human rights organizations all around the world. The police themselves were the culprits, planting guns and drugs as evidence to justify the people they killed, such as in the case of the 17-year-old student named Ian De Los Santos. The excess confidence put into local law enforcers has put a decline in focusing efforts in other essential sectors of the community, such as social welfare and health. Aside from reallocation of funds, researchers found that proper policing practices are seen to be effective when law enforcers build positive relationships with their community and avoid tactics that use excessive force against the citizens. According to the National Institute of Justice, police officers are empowered to use force. However, it should be the minimal amount of force needed to control an incident, effect an arrest, or protect themselves or others from harm or death. But these events beg to differ. We, at Intrigued Mind, sympathise with all those affected by the wrongdoings of the police throughout the years, both in the past and the present. We hope this video serves its purpose to educate people on what the police system can improve on by learning from its own history. The police were created to protect citizens in the first place. However, in today's setting, we see riots as if it were back in the 1950s, and the rise of violent drugs wars like the ones that happened in the 1970s. We learn history to prevent it from reoccurring, but somehow it keeps repeating itself, especially when it comes from issues that are so embedded in the country's culture. With police brutality seen throughout history, we see it in the many injustices done by the police until today. But researchers show promise into how it was not too late for the police to change their systems. Community-based policing was put into practice in such countries as Serbia, Northern Ireland and Sierra Leone. In Sierra Leone, Their police management structure became more transparent, with recruitment and promotion using merit-based procedures rather than through cronyism. Officers were made accountable and the public could record their complaints without any bias. It continues until today with their government support. They showed the world that a police force is capable of strengthening even a small community's sense of security, which could lead to a far-reaching impact in society's economic, social and political development. However, community-based policing cannot be achieved until they have addressed their negative public perceptions, set attitudes and intimidating behaviours. International efforts such as an International Peace Academy have indicated that for a police organisation to undergo reform, it has to reorientate itself and face political, financial, logistical and historical obstacles. It is just a matter of time that this philosophy of improving community relationship with a police institution will be implemented into a global scale. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video and leave your suggestion in the comments below.